System Shock is the 2023 remake by game preservation experts Nightdive Studios, originally by Looking Glass Studios in 1994. System Shock is a watershed game. While sometimes credited as the first immersive sim, it certainly set a new benchmark for dungeon crawlers in the 90s with its unique depth and compelling sci-fi levels. It also contains a cultural icon in the form of Shodan, gaming's first great rampant AI character. System Shock was a cultural landmark on release, and now it's a personal one for Nightdive, a team who mostly does the hard technical work porting games, for example Blood in their Fresh Supply edition, essentially now making a full game from the ground up on Unreal Engine. 2023 has been a year of action horror remakes, with Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space getting good treatment in the AAA area. System Shock is much more interesting, however, much less played than either of those two modern games, but still well known. It exists more as a symbol, a reference point for a kind of design, much like the 451 code that exists at the beginning of the game, which has been iterated upon in many games since. For this reason, it surprised me at first the faithfulness with which the original is rendered in this remake, until I realized my myopic perspective is the only reason for this surprise. Video games are a new art form, and only in my recent generation does System Shock have the symbolic reference that a Citizen Kane does for movies. Normal fans of the original Shock are healthy, working, and not even really old. In fact, they made this remake. Of course a superfan would make the remake like the original. It was cynical of me to assume that a developer would change important aspects of it that may be considered clunky by today's standard, except for the mostly inarguable problems like the original's obtuse UI. In System Shock, the player is the capital H hacker. It was the 90s when this game was written. After a stylish introduction, the hacker is caught trying to steal cyberpunk implants. He is given a shady opportunity for his freedom and the implant by the VP of Citadel Station, Edward Diego. Citadel Station is run by the AI Shodan, and Diego asks the hacker to use his prowess to turn off the ethical constraints on the AI. He does this, is put in a kind of stasis to recover from his implant surgery, and wakes up later on Citadel to find Shodan has sent everything to hell. After this, the plot loosens up and the hacker is free to wander the station, trying to stop Shodan's multiple plans to destroy humanity. Gameplay is composed of several simple loops that are interlocking. First and foremost is simply exploring around the wonderfully realized Citadel Station. Citadel is the midpoint between design focused on immersion and gameplay, the midpoint between Talos 1 and a Doom level. Looping hallways flow well when the player's intent is to progress, but there are flourishes and branches representing observation stations, laboratories, storage closets. Bathrooms are present on every floor. Second, there is looting, bodies and crates, as well as whatever is lying around on the ground or shelves. There is ammo and weapons, of course, but also junk that exists to be recycled. The player can find a machine on every floor that turns trash into money. The money lets them buy ammo, weapon upgrades, or consumables to assist in combat. Combat is alright. The player has a multitude of guns, which in a vacuum feel good. All of them are punchy in animation and sound. My favorite weapon is the Spark Beam Energy Pistol, which instead of ammo uses the player's limited energy pool. It has 3 fire modes: useless, useful, and overuse. The other weapons have multiple ammo types for use on different enemy types. For example, the pistol has normal ammunition for mutants, but Teflon rounds for robots. While resources for each aren't limited, guns feel almost completely useless when not using the correct kind of ammo. This does not help that there is almost no feedback when shooting something. Enemies die in spectacular manner, but barely flinch when shot. There is an implant that lets the player see a single enemy's health, and later hack robots, but pressing Alt just to see health is cumbersome and not useful during a fight. Enemies hit-scan the player if they see their body mass. The optimal engagement has the player peeking around the corner, tricking the AI into shooting the wall. This initially feels engaging, but gets repetitive quickly when tilting constantly around the station. While there are main objectives in the game, on every floor of the station the player must decrease Shodan's presence by destroying security cameras and CPU nodes. In a way, this is the most engaging part of the game. It is at its best when reminding the player that she controls every aspect of the Citadel. When destroying her nodes or cameras, she often comes on the intercom to harass the hacker, and sends or reveals hidden enemies to defeat them. The constant surprise, combined with her performance, is worth the price of admission. The freaky, overlapping, and pitch-shifting voices with strange emphasis elevates her dialogue into something truly memorable and threatening. A problem with the game is death. However, the designers did a good job of making respawning diegetic. On each floor is a medbay, which Shodan uses to create cyborgs. The hacker may reset these to become respawn points. Dying, except under special circumstances, simply sends the player to the closest respawn point. There isn't much downside other than only being set to half health. This complete lack of punishment is problematic. Nothing has changed from the point the player dies. If a player makes a mistake while fighting an enemy and dies, they may just walk back and do the same thing they did until the damage accumulates and they may continue, only saving resources when necessary, and the respawn points are arbitrarily removed, say, during a boss fight. This happened to me multiple times on my first playthrough, repeating encounters in bullheaded fashion until I won, walking back from a respawn chamber even if it was an elevator ride away in some cases. It wasn't engaging, but the lack of punishment meant these encounters were doable without losing much more than maybe some pistol ammo. Similarly, some floors have surgery bays which heal the hacker all the way. Why use a healing patch when there's a full heal just down the hall for free, and why use one later when there could be a surgery station in the room just ahead? The only loss is some time. This, combined with repetitive gunplay, is the game's biggest failing. It becomes a circular repetition of leaning and using lightweight weapons, dying, walking back and repeating until progression is made. Only intrinsically motivated, totally immersed players will get a fulfilling experience. The freedom of exploration can also be a nuisance. Many floors are accessible after the first, but the player is still expected to find certain mechanics and experience the game in a certain way. My first playthrough I navigated incorrectly. I went to the flight deck early and ended up way out of my league, using a pistol to defeat the boss. Then I was rewarded with later versions of all the implants and gadgets, as well as attachments for guns I did not own yet. When going back, I ended up being unrewarded for exploration because the version 1 of implants at this point are worthless. Then, I finally received guns that would have been useful for the flight deck, but because of the lack of punishment for death, the difficulty was not enough to turn me away from pushing through it. It was generally a confusing turn-off of an experience. It was with a shock I realized. Instead of determining where I would go based off audio logs I found, I was expected basically to fully explore each level one by one, in order, despite the freedom on offer. Progression also can be somewhat ambiguous. It's not hard to see a player wandering in circles over and over, hopefully this time to stumble across the key code or button they missed. Cyberspace is the last major aspect of the game. Hacking is represented by a 6-off shooter. This mode of play easily outdoes any standard hacking minigame, and is probably the biggest improvement the remake makes over the original, which represented cyberspace with wireframe hell. However, it is still quite shallow compared to the rest of the game. The player just moves in circles around simple arenas and shoots, using the proper ability when queued. Finishing these cyberspace missions unlocks things in the real space, and often is necessary for progression. While better than most hacking minigames, it still is an oddly placed pace breaker that often feels more like a random chore than something worthwhile. It is only shocking on its first reveal. Other nitpicks include the music. Not the soundtrack itself, but the awkward manner it cuts in halfway through fights rather than at the beginning, and cuts out whenever it feels like it, from the instant the last enemy is dead to minutes afterward. Binding interact to right-click by default is a false promise. There aren't many buttons to press other than the ones to open doors or do wire puzzles to warrant such unusual, easy access to such action. This gives the mechanical identity of the game a sense of imbalance, even for an immersive sim. Overall, I consider the System Shock Remake an interesting project. It certainly reveals what made the original special, doing a great job of capturing Shodan and introducing her to a new generation. On the other hand, actually playing it is a mixed bag. As important as the game is, technical and artistic improvements have made System Shock's many successors more impressive, deep, smoother, and impactful. When playing the remake, I'm impressed by the passion of Nightdive and the imaginations of Looking Glass, but in the actual moment, I'm trying to engage rather than being engaged with their fixations. Thanks for watching.